I'm going to talk about a slightly different way to potentially motivate student buy-in. I think that what Chris is doing is great and really also shows a lot of that idea of sort of the growth mindset and fixed mindset that's really been shown recently to be very beneficial to student learning. So one way that I've motivated students in the past at Elizabethtown College is to talk about professional skills, because a lot of the students are very motivated by the idea of being a professional engineer, or they really want to get out into the workforce, or things really hit home for them once they have an internship and they see that these things are useful. So talking about how to kind of bring in the professional skills in terms of using standards-based grading as well. So this research group earlier conducted some research that was looking at kind of the motivational aspects of standards-based grading, and one of the highest was this idea of utility. So utility was a value construct related to progress toward personal goals. So where students saw that utility and that value there, that really helped to motivate the use of standards-based grading and their kind of buy-in to that process. And so just a few ideas in terms of what you can potentially do when you're kind of introducing standards-based grading for the first time. And so one is asking the students to relate the outcomes that are in your assignment or that are your course level outcomes to professional competencies that they've either seen practicing engineers use out in an internship environment, or that they imagine that practicing engineers would use. Or think about what they would love to do, as an engineer once they graduate, and think about how those outcomes relate to that. So you can imagine things like communication that they may initially sort of be resistant to. When they really start thinking about the day-to-day job of a practicing engineer, that may become a little more motivated. Another thing to consider is thinking about how standards-based grading relates the student tasks to the professional skills. So I think, again, because it's a professional endeavor, being an engineer, sometimes there's a little bit of a disconnect in engineering education between what they're being asked to do as students, especially on sort of homework or that lower level work, and maybe the professional skills that they need. So thinking about relating those two things. Also, standards-based grading is really great for allowing students to see progress over time. So again, focusing on that idea that, hey, right now when you're a sophomore, maybe you're not where you need to be in some of these professional skills, but this feedback, as Chris was saying, will help you get there. And then finally, that also it can help students discover career paths that align with their strengths. So here at Elizabethtown, we do a lot of strengths finder work, and everyone on campus knows their strengths. And we really focus on sort of aligning what your purposeful life work is going to be with what your strengths are. So not necessarily thinking about you have to fill in all your weaknesses, but also you should know what your strengths are, and then you should choose some career paths, or explore internships, or think about your capstone projects also in terms of your strengths. And standards-based grading can help be one of those tools that identifies in the engineering profession what are your strengths and what are your weaknesses. And some work that we're considering continuing to do in this research group is also relating standards-based grading to ABET assessment procedures. So this is one of the things that we all have to do as engineering faculty, is constantly keep in touch with how we're meeting those outcomes for ABET. And we can also bring students into that conversation. So there's a really great article in the Journal of Engineering Education that was out of Dartmouth a few years ago, and they surveyed recently graduated and now practicing professional engineers, and asked them sort of, okay, what out of the ABET competencies do you use most often? And I think that students are a bit surprised sometimes when they see, again, how much sort of communication and people skills and teamwork come up, and how little sometimes the technical work comes up. So in my classes, especially in freshman year, I often bring that in, and I'm very sort of transparent with students about, here's what ABET and professional engineers think are important, and thinking about what do you think are your current strengths and weaknesses in these things, and then how can standards-based grading sort of help you improve in those specific areas. And then we're also very interested, kind of as a research group, about how standards-based grading could help directly address those ABET competencies when it comes time for the self-studies and the visits. And so we think that instead of picking through individual assignments, if at the end you can sort of provide more direct data and feedback on, say, communication, that could be a real advantage for standards-based grading. So a couple of other things that have come out of some work in the classroom in the past few years are some less obvious advantages that particularly help certain student populations. So one that kind of surprised me that I hadn't thought about as much is international students. So when I've had international students in the classroom, they seem to especially appreciate standards-based grading because a lot of times when they're transitioning to the American education system, it's very different than what they've come from. They may have come from kind of a European system where all the grade is on the exam or whatever that is. And so standards-based grading really helps sort of make that those expectations explicit and help them work towards that in kind of a continuous improvement sort of way. So that one kind of surprised me, but then makes a lot of sense when I stop and think about it. And also some underrepresented students have certainly given me the feedback in the past that it really helps build their confidence on abilities. So if you're focusing more on their abilities and their improvement, rather than just getting a grade back, we often hear that underrepresented students underestimate their confidence. They say they're less confident even though their GPAs are higher. So there seems to be some disconnect when you're just sort of giving back a 90% on an exam or something, how they feel about that versus getting feedback specifically on sort of their strengths and their progress. And then again, this idea that ties in really nicely with what Chris was presenting about really promoting that growth mindset and that kind of continuous improvement type of mindset. So I think that is all that I have got. Hopefully we can have a little bit of time for questions if there are any, or go ahead and move on to our next speaker. All right. Sounds like that was hopefully abundantly clear. So if anyone wants to talk about this further, there's also the opportunity to post on the discussion boards as well.
So Sarah, one question that I was kind of wondering is what have you noticed in terms of students acting on the feedback that you've gotten? There are a couple questions too that were posted down in terms of do you recommend using ABET as standards for students? Any hypotheses as why international students benefit? So you could answer those as well. But again, my question was just kind of, have you noticed any trends in terms of actions that students take in terms of the feedback that they get from standards-based grading?
Sure. So I've heard similar things to Chris in terms of it becomes a little less of why did I get this grade or why did I lose these points, and a little more of what could I do to get to this highest level of achievement. So that is nice. And I think it also does depend on the individual student. So some students, uh, just like, when using a traditional scoring system, some students really always want to get to the highest level of every outcome, and some students are sort of okay with saying, I'm fine with sitting at the kind of B level for this outcome. So it has varied a bit there. In terms of the international students, again, I think that when the system is so unfamiliar and just the education system and the expectations in the classroom are maybe very different than what they have come from. I think having especially the really explicit rubrics so that they know the expectations extremely well is very comforting to them. So there's just kind of one less unknown when otherwise they turn in an assignment and then they get a score back for it and it's not quite clear, ahead of time sometimes as to what the expectations were for that particular course or that particular exercise.